So this week we are learning about different kinds of arguments, and there are two basic kinds of arguments. And one is what we would call a deductive argument, and that's what this video is about. So deductive arguments, they use what we would call necessary reasoning. And what I mean by that is that they make the claim that if the premises are all true, then the conclusion is necessarily true. Now, that's not always going to be the case because there can be bad deductive arguments, and we'll learn more about that in the next video. But what's true of any deductive argument is that the claim is being made, whether explicitly, where it's actually stated, or whether it's implicit, it's implied. But the claim is being made that the premises infer a necessarily true conclusion. All right. So that's what's going to be true of any deductive argument, is that if the argument's good, then accepting the premises means necessarily accepting the conclusion. So there are a number of different kinds of deductive arguments. And I want to present three that are actually good arguments and just kind of talk about their character, what makes them deductive. Okay, so the first one, for the first premise, we'll say all flowers are plants. And then for premise 2, all daisies are flowers. And then for my conclusion, all daisies are plants. Okay. Now, this is a deductive argument because the premises, they contain all the information we need to infer the conclusion, and we really can't come to any other conclusion than what we come to here. And one thing that's true of deductive arguments is that we can typically map it out and kind of visually see how the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises. So in this case, if we take all the flowers in the world, let's say that this circle represents all the flowers in the world, we're saying that they are all plants. So let's make this circle represent all the plants in the world. The next premise says that all daisies are flowers. So let's make this circle the daisies group, and it's inside the flower group. And then the conclusion just says that all daisies are plants, and sure enough, the daisy circle is inside the plant circle. And so there's really no way, if these premises are true, for this conclusion to be anything except true. So the conclusion follows necessarily from these premises, and this is a good argument because the premises are true, and so they do infer a necessarily true conclusion. It has a good form, and it has all true claims. But we'll learn more about that in the next couple videos. But what we, the important thing to gather from this video is that the argument is deductive. The conclusion is made certain by the premises. Okay. All right, let's look at another one. Okay, so for the next one, we'll say the premise is London is north of Paris and south of Edinburgh. And then the conclusion is that Paris is south of Edinburgh. Okay, and again, this is a deductive argument because the arguer is implying in this argument that there's really no way that the conclusion is probably true. It follows certainly from the premise. All right. So it's not arguing for the probability of the conclusion. It's arguing for the necessity of the conclusion on the basis of the evidence which is given in the premise. And again, we can map this one out. What we're saying here is that London is north of Paris. So we could have L here for London, and it is north of Paris. And London is south of Edinburgh. So we'll put Edinburgh up here. Okay. And then the conclusion just says that Paris is south of Edinburgh. And sure enough, if the premise is true, then this conclusion follows with necessity. All right. And indeed, it turns out that if you look up on a map, you'll find that the premise is true. So this is another good argument, and the true premise infers a necessarily true conclusion. Okay, so that's another example. There's no probability here. It's an argument where certainty is achieved. All right, and then for the last one, for premise 1, Seattle is a city in Washington. Premise 2, Washington is a state in the U.S. And then for my conclusion, Seattle is a city in the U.S. Again, this argument is not making the case that the conclusion is probably true. The premises have all the information packed into them already to derive the conclusion as being certain. And sure enough, this is another good argument. If we have Seattle here as a city within Washington, the state, and Washington is a state within the U.S., then sure enough, Seattle is a city inside the U.S. And of course, these premises are true. And as we see from this diagram, the conclusion is not probable, it is certain. All the information we need to know that the conclusion is true is baked right into the premises. So that would be certainly true. And it's that certainty that makes the argument deductive. When an argument is arguing for the probability of the conclusion, then we have a different kind of argument that we're going to learn about later. But when the argument is that the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, then we are dealing with a deductive argument.